morning. This is Stan in Gainesville, Florida, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Hi, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas, and today we are discussing pin connectors, buying gear, and working with video designers on Light Talk.
And this is David in Central City, Colorado. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers.
And we're still here.
And we're still here. And guess what, guys? I leave Colorado tomorrow. The show opens tonight, Billy Budd, and we're very excited about that. And I'm very proud to have designed this one with my wonderful friend, Ken Kazan. The whole production team was Ken Kazan, was the director, Takeshi Kata and me. We co-designed the set, although I must be honest with you, Takeshi did the lion's share of the work. I just basically took over to make sure, that everything was going to be fine and make any sort of decisions once it moved into the theater, which there were a few, and we're all very happy about. Our costume designer was Jonathan Knipscher, and of course, our projection designer was Sean Cawelti. And we've got to have Sean on the show. This guy's amazing because he's not only a great video designer, he's also a puppet master. And I've worked with him on several shows, both as a video designer and a puppet master. He has his own company in LA. Really interesting guy. So I'm very happy about this show. It's a lot of fun. And I'm really happy to get home. I'm really looking forward.
Congratulations, David.
Thank you. So Stan, what's going on with you?
We are in the process of reviewing bids now on our project here in Gainesville, and we're $300,000 over budget, which is pretty small. That's a small amount on almost a $3 million project. But the good news is that the work that we did came in $3,000 under what we estimated. So we're really happy. So we don't have to cut too much. So we're happy about that. And the hospital project goes on, and we've got all of our data now straightened out. And the scientists are now organizing all of that information, and we'll do the second collection period in the new hospital in the fall. So those two things are going on, and I'm reading plays for the fall.
So, hey, why don't we get started? Steve has our first question.
Yes, it comes all the way from the Wolverine State in Michigan, and it is Charles. And he says, I want to expand our inventory at the school. I have ETC equipment now. I have found 12 Altman 360Qs for $600. Should I buy?
Buy 24.
What a deal. Such a deal.
Well, we shouldn't be laughing. No. Okay.
No.
Well.
No, don't buy them. You have no business buying those lights. Just stop right now. In fact, I did a search for you, so no thought required, Charles. I went to GearSource, and you can buy a used Source 4, the big full size, for about $175. You can buy the Source 4 Junior for about $120.
Wow.
Or you can buy the Strand SL for $150.
Wow.
The guys who have the Source 4s and the guys who have the Strand SL, they have over 200 lights, and I guarantee 200 each, and I guarantee you they're going to wheel and deal. So I bet if you call them up and say I have $600, you might have to sweeten that up to about $650 or $700, but you can get a light that you already have. So you already said your inventory is ETC. I mean, you may be up against the wall and you're doing carousel and need some extra lights. But rent them. Don't buy an Altman 360Q. You're just no. Don't do that. Stop. Walk away.
Well, you're buying an obsolete light. I mean,
can you get the lamp? I mean,
I know that's
the sockets. Problem. I think you can't even buy the TP22 sockets anymore. I think I read that those are hard to find.
Yeah, I totally agree with Steve. Buy a bunch of the Source 4s. You know that ETC will back them up, at least for about the next 5 to 10 years. But the 360Q, no, that's not a good deal.
What color are they?
What, the 360Qs?
Yeah, you know about 360Qs in their color.
That's right. They were black. Oh, you talk about the lens or the body of them?
No, the body.
Yeah, they were browns and they were blacks, remember?
And there were grays.
Oh, they're grays? I never saw a gray.
Yeah, the vintage 360Qs
right.
were color-coded, so you can get a sense of what you're buying.
I never saw the gray ones.
I did. Now that Steve mentioned it, I remember the gray ones.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter. But I mean, I don't buy them. That's
well,
the bottom line.
When I worked at Production Arts with Steve Terry, back in the day, we painted them. They were all painted. Every time they came back from the road, they got touched up.
I remember they were black. You guys painted them black.
They were black. That's right. All the 360 Qs at PA were black.
Okay, let's just tell this right now to Charles. If you are considering buying a light that Stan, Steve, and I actually used back in the 70s and 80s, that should tell you right now, run away. Oh,
I mean, we're vintage, and we like vintage, but this is going the bridge too far.
No, it's too vintage. It's beyond vintage. We're into rot. Okay.
Yes, at a certain point, the wine turns bad.
Yes, exactly. Okay, and by the way, they don't have very good optics either. I mean, that's the bottom line. If you put a 360Q right next to a Source 4, and you look at that field, you're going to be yeah. So anyway, good question. Hey, Roger from Detroit asks, do you have any techniques for lighting a show with a video designer? How close do you work with each other? Well, it's funny that this question's here. I was just talking about Sean Cawelti, who is a video designer who I've worked with on many shows. And I also do video design. I've done video designs for my lighting designs. But I think we talked about this a while back, the sense how important it is to have that strong connection. First of all, you have to be on the same page from day one. There's a lot of jazz happening, a lot of improvisation happening throughout the entire process, from pre-production into actually lighting the show. So yes, I work very, very, very close with the video designer. Also, don't make the common mistake that I've seen some lighting designers make, mostly student lighting designers, in which they light the show before the video comes in, which is insane because I've worked with technical directors and production managers who don't even schedule lighting and video together. And I said, no. I said, I cannot sit down in a theater and start lighting a show without seeing the content. And the content doesn't have to be finished. It just needs to be up there so that you can do all the balancing of the lighting, because sometimes you can't light it as bright as you may want to light it. You have to be able to see the content. You may want to match color. Great video design and lighting design has a color palette that matches or could contrast for very specific moments. So to me, it's sort of like lighting a show without a set. Or lighting a show without costumes, which is a lot of times we have to do until first dress rehearsal. What do you guys think?
Well, I agree. I just did a dance, Bolero, and I worked with a video designer on that. And what we did was he had mocked everything up in Photoshop. We then moved that to a visualizer, and we started making decisions together about where lighting would take on the heavy lifting, and where it would push into the background, and projection would take on the heavy lifting. To the point that we were looking at different areas of the set. In this moment, lighting needs to handle this half of the set while projection is doing that half of the set. We worked through it. It was a great experience. It looked really good, and I think it looked really good not so much because of the designers, but it looked really good because of the communication. And we were on the same page working through it, and neither one of us, I didn't feel that my toes were stepped on, and I hope he doesn't either. But I thought it turned out really well, and it all came down to sitting down and doing your homework and making sure the focus is where it's supposed to be, and understanding what the choreographer ultimately wanted from lighting and from video.
I love it when it works together, and when it doesn't, boy, does it look bad. So I think that's a key to it. We do it at UF, and when the content, even if the content arrives late, it doesn't matter. We just adjust the color, and when you get those things synced up, then it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is. I just want to mention one more thing about the process, because when you're lighting a show with the director and the video designers there right next to you or behind you, and I'll just talk about what happened this past week with Sean, is that all the decisions you're making on the spot, not only in composing the atmosphere, but even more important in transitions, that you have to sync the video transitions with the lighting transitions. And it's really kind of cool, because what we were talking about last week about discrete timings, You actually use that in video as well in comparison to the lighting timings. So there's a lot of time that Sean and I took actually syncing and manipulating the timings of the transitions in video and interlinking that with the lighting. And you could do some amazing effects doing that with video. Also, I did the same thing with Driscoll when Driscoll and I did that show in Italy, where he was the video designer, I was the lighting designer, where you have a very close collaboration. You almost have to be like one designer. So I was very fortunate to work with two excellent video designers. And I'm sure if you asked the video designer the same question, they would probably say the same.
I have a thing I'll mention about timing since you brought that up. Our projections design faculty, and is also a professional here, likes to take his cues via MIDI from the console. So he runs watch out, and then he gets the cue information from the lighting designer, and then he decides if he wants it on time with the lights, in advance of the lights, after the lights, and he sets the timing up in the video software, but he takes the execution from the light cue. And that's how he can do it either way, but that's the way he prefers it.
Yeah, and stage managers usually like to call one set of cue numbers, which you can do when it's synced off the console, but when it's not, they usually call tab cues. That's the terminology. They'll call tab cue 23. But those tab cues will always be in relation to the lighting cues in the board. So if like the tab cue happens between 111 and 112, this stage manager I'm working with right now, who's excellent, by the way, she will call that tab cue 111.5, knowing that it's between the two lighting cues. It helps her keep things organized, which makes a lot of sense to me.
I've got one here from Alex in Lyon, who asks, could you explain why some theaters use pin connectors and others use twist lock, and what is the standard on Broadway? Well, I haven't been to Broadway lately, so I did some primary research on this question, and I reached out to a former student, Topher Sturmreiter, who's a Broadway associate and does tours, and I asked. And he said, well, practicals and tungsten fixtures are still 2P&G, 2-pin and ground pin connectors on most Broadway shows. And then I wrote back and I said, what about movers? And he said most movers are the L620, which is the twist lock. And the difference, of course, is that the twist lock is safer in the sense that the connectors lock together. When we do schools, we do twist lock. We don't do pin connectors. Are a legacy technology. They've been around forever, and lots of theaters still have them in them, and they're quite inexpensive. So I don't know what I would say the reason why a theater is using that. If you went in to do a renovation and you had to change 400 circuits, that's a bunch of money. So you may or you might not change that out, or you have a lot of fixtures. Some places build adapters to go from one to the other. But the pin connector was the original. Actually, I think the stage pocket was the original connector.
Stage plug.
Stage plug.
The stage
right.
plug. Went into a stage pocket.
Went into it. Yeah, well, it was basically just if actually the best image of it was in Back to the Future when he's trying to plug in that wire for the lightning. That's a stage plug or stage pocket. I think they must have had it on the set, but the pin connector came later. I think they were originally made out of Bakelite. There's a whole lot of history there about those guys. But the twist lock for sure is a more modern device. And in between the L620 and the pin connector, there was what was called the old style twist lock, where the pin went out as opposed to in. Where on the new versions they go in. I worked in a theater that had both of those, and that was
frustrating.
Yeah. That was frustrating. Yeah, it was frustrating.
Yeah, make sure if you're renting lights, make sure you know what type of cables you have and what type of circuits are in the theater.
But you think, a pin connector really is dangerous because there's nothing. If it slides halfway out, you have exposed, contacts, and something can fall on it. That's why it's always good to tape them together or do an electrician's knot and so on. But as far as I know, it looks like today there are still pin connectors on Broadway, and the L620s are the primary thing for the movers.
If you order a light from Strand or from ETC, the standard connection on there is a pin connector, and it's probably a derivative of the Bates. I prefer a pin connector. If I agree, if I'm using a motor or a moving light, then there's a twist lock on it. But I think a lot of that also is the voltage hit that comes when you fire a moving light up. And also, I just don't want it coming unplugged. But I think pin connector is the standard that you're going to find in theaters. There are 25 different twist locks made. So all of a sudden, that becomes confusing too. And as Stan said, sometimes people are making adapters or using more than one type of twist lock in their theater. I'm not a big fan of them.
So what's going to happen, guys, when we have wireless power?
Dream, dream, dream.
Dream.
But in schools, I'll just add, in schools, like high schools and stuff, some of the safety people are not too happy with the pin connector from a safety standpoint.
They don't know any better.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
no one has taught them. It's why were twist locks used? Because an architect or an electrical engineer said, this is what I studied in college. Let's put that on there.
I don't know. If I'm doing a new space and it's all complete new inventory and I'm charged with making that decision, I sometimes argue with myself about whether it's a pin connector or a twist lock. Depends if the institution has lots of twist locks in it already, then that sort of drives the day. If it's brand new, it's not a Roadhouse, I don't know, because it is a safer connector. It is more expensive, though. Absolutely true.
I think also the advantage of the pin connector is that when you're running cable on the deck, the pin connector is less of an obstacle than a twist lock is.
That's true,
That's
too.
a point.
Mm-hmm.
You are listening to Light Talk with the Lumen Brothers, and today we have a public service announcement from No More 10 out of 12s. Lighting folks work hard, long hours, little sleep, high stress. Let's admit it, some of us are lightaholics. This is not healthy. For those stricken with the need to accept every job offered them, Lightaholics Anonymous is here to help you. Lightaholics Anonymous is the self-help organization that doesn't work too hard. Most self-help programs have 12 steps. We've reduced our program to just 6 short steps. This is because we practice what we preach. The first step is self-awareness. Ask yourself these simple questions. Do you find yourself climbing a ladder in retail stores to adjust the track lighting? Do you light your menorah with Lecos instead of candles? Does your Christmas tree resemble the rig from the last Rolling Stones tour? Well, then you just might be a lightaholic. Lightaholics Anonymous will guide you through their following 6 steps to quickly heal this addiction and become the laziest lighting person ever. Step 1. At the end of your next tech, stand up and tell everyone there you have a confession to make. Then say your name and admit that you're a lightaholic. Step 2. Turn down the next 10 projects that are offered to you. Step 3. Restrict your website to accept only 1 hit per week. Step 4. Reduce the number of business cards in your wallet to just 1. Step 5. Make amends to all the shows you did not do your best work because you were overworked. You may also wish to refund that fee. Step 6. Repeat steps 1 through 5 as many times as necessary until your addiction is cured. Lightaholics Anonymous, making the world safer and happier for lighting folks everywhere.
Well, the sound of those flock of ducks. It's not a gaggle of ducks, by the way. There are certain words for certain fowl, and it happens to be, I believe, a flock of ducks. But that flocks of ducks
makes a bigger meal for me.
Tells us that it's once again time for our Let's Talk About segment. And, it's really interesting this week because we got a letter from someone I knew, a stage manager. She's a fantastic stage manager. I'm not going to give out her name. She's going to remain anonymous. But this is what her email said. Quote, I am a stage manager and I am fed up with lighting designers who have terrible headset etiquette. This one guy eats and drinks, snorts and burps into his open mic constantly.
Like me.
He also talks derogatorily about other company members. And he also talks over my standbys. What do I do? Well, the first, when I got this email, I was saying, is this person actually working in the theater? Still working in the theater? Oh my God. And I thought, headset etiquette is so important. And the first place you usually teach it is at school.
Right.
Right? And you work with whoever's teaching stage management, and you work certainly with your lighting designers, and sound designs. Anyone who's on that headset has to have good headset etiquette. And you usually see it fall apart in college, university productions, unless the mentors are really, really, really tough. All right. So there are certain things that all of us have to say about this. So I'm going to just let my brothers go, and then I'll come back if they didn't cover something I wanted to cover. So what do you guys think? Headset etiquette.
So here at Florida, we have a very professional production manager who's monitoring headsets all the times and training stage manager. We have a very professional kind of thing there. So that's not an issue. But when I taught in a smaller school where we didn't have a stage management person, and I was the tech director, lighting designer, and I sort of had to oversee that, the students were very difficult to control because it's a party line, and party lines are fun. And in between the work, there's people start chatting, and I would put my technique was I put a headset biscuit in my office, and the students never knew when I was listening and when I wasn't listening. And so they had, and then of course they got smart and they invented code. So like if one of them saw me in the office, they would say something like, I don't know, cornflakes, right. And that meant Stan was in his office.
The bird is nesting. The duck is nesting.
Yeah, the bird is nesting. But it did keep them on their toes. And I would tell them, when you start getting arrogant or complacent, that's when you're in trouble. When you think you're so good you don't have to concentrate, that's when the plane crashes, or that's when you change the software and you have plane crashes. So they did learn the lesson, but it took quite a bit of sort of creativity to kind of mature them into, like, you're not that good that you can just behave that way. And so but we do teach it in school, and at Florida it has not been an issue in recent times, and sometimes people get a little bit anxious. They want to get a cue finished. They jump in. I'm even guilty of that, but I'm always conscious of. The stage manager is, they say jump, you say how high, and you respect that communication so that people can talk. Sometimes we need multiple channels, and we're in the process now of changing our headset system because we're getting so big that we need to put certain people on their own channels so they can talk to each other without. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Absolutely, and it's a safety issue.
Absolutely.
It really is a safety issue. It is not a party line. It should never be a party line. And believe me, I have come down hard on students about this, and they take it as an insult. How dare you tell us not to have fun? Well, it's not about fun. It's about safety. And it's about efficiently calling a show so that cues aren't missed. Steve, what do you think?
Well, I think getting back to the question, probably what I would suggest is make it easier for this designer to use the headset. And I think what I might do is I might interface a switch, a nice big switch, to turn his or her mic on and off, so that it's something very visual. Maybe there's even a little LED connected with it so he sees when his mic is live. And I would go back and have probably a private conversation and not I wouldn't bring it up at the production meeting.
No.
But I think I would say, listen, you got to stop eating Cheetos at the tech table with your mic live. So I think there's some things, you're never going to get rid of the occasional heavy breathing or the kind of snorting, or if he has dentures, the whistling while he speaks. But I think you can go back and say, look, you can't really be drinking a soda or a bottle of water and talk on the headset at the same time. You can't really be eating your lunch and talking on the headset at the same time. I think I think there's some pretty easy things you can do to correct the most egregious things that you're speaking about. As far as kind of, I think you said interruptions maybe. I think the interruptions, that should not be happening by the time, really, in all fairness, by the time you get to dress rehearsals. Because as a stage manager, you and the crew deserve your opportunity to practice your craft. So, everybody gets a little anxious, can you bring that light up to full or whatever. But I think, if it's a commonplace thing, like it seems like he or she is talking on the headset all the way through opening night, then I think you have a chat and just say, look, here's what we got to do so that we can get your work on stage the way you want it. As opposed to, the board operator needs time, you need time, everyone needs time to work on the show. And I think if you're tactful about it and adult about it, he or she will get in line with you. If not, just take the headset away. After the last tech, you don't get a headset.
There you go.
I've seen people do that.
Yeah.
I've seen them say, okay, we're going to switch you over to our hearing impaired system so that you hear what's going on, but you can't react during previews anymore. You got to stop that.
Right. Especially during previews.
Oh, yeah. Once you get into dresses, it should be, I would think it should be minimal.
I have a headset through previews, but I just don't chat on it.
Right.
And
Right.
first of all, there are certain rules that I teach my students. And I'm going to say right now, I am guilty of a lot of this stuff. And it's usually because I forget to turn my headset off. And it's usually, and then Steve's idea of a big button or a big light is a great idea. But the headset systems that I'm using is the little clear comms, that little button that sort of turns green when you're active and doesn't. But in a dark theater, it's hard to see. And you know what my assistants do? They reach over and turn off my headset. And Sue Young did that last night. I was doing something. I forgot to turn my headset off. I don't know, if I was talking to someone else. And she just reached over and turned it off. And so as an assistant, talk to your designer about that. Say, I know that you sometimes forget. Would you mind if I did this? And the designer would know, absolutely, go ahead and turn it off. So, yeah. And try to finish your command, whatever it's, bringing channels up, when they go into a standby, when the stage manager says standby Q23, you stop. You say update.
Right.
Right.
Update and get off. I have a question, David, about your point about, and about Steve's opinion as well on this, about you forgetting to turn the mic off. I used to have that problem, and for a while I bought some of those, they're like telephone handsets that have a button in the middle, so you could hold it to your ear. I got it for me because it's hard for me to wear a headset because I have hearing aids on, right? And then if I take the hearing aid off, then I turn up the volume too loud. So I got those phones, and so I could put the phone next to my ear and listen. But to speak, I have to push I just squeeze my, it's right there on the handset. And I saw that was used like on Broadway, or like conductors would have phones and other people. What do you think of those as a solution, perhaps as well?
I love them. I've used them in Europe a lot, and I've used them in the United States as well. I've always loved the phones because personally, I don't like wearing a headset because I like to hear the orchestra.
The music.
I like
the words.
And sometimes I really don't want to hear the stage manager. And I usually, my assistant will be on headset, and I'll ask my assistant, just tell me or just tap on the table when she calls the cue.
So I like the phones too, but I was curious what other people thought. I think they're a much more efficient and better way to communicate and not get in people's way.
I mean, I would definitely at least use a single muff headset. Never use a double muff headset.
Yeah.
Because you need to be able to hear the director and you need to be able to hear the show. So Steve has our last question of the day.
Yes, I saw this on Facebook and I have stolen it because it's just too good a question. And it revolves around the idea of opening act and primary act. And this question says you have two rock and roll bands playing on stage. The first band wants a lot of haze, and the second does not want any haze. What do you do? Well, typically, the principal act has control over what's happening that night. So if the headliner says, I don't want any haze on stage, the opening act doesn't get any haze. That is a kind of a loose rule. It depends on how tight the two bands are. If they're really tight, they get along, they're trying to help each other. No one's going to step on each other. But there is something to be said about going further, how you set up the rig, how much equipment does the opening act band get? Do they get the full stage or do they get half the stage? So it's a complex question. What do you think, David?
Well, no, I agree, and especially about how much of the rig. The second act, the headliners may have certain lights, certain equipment that, maybe they're audience blinders or maybe they're a certain type of laser that they'll say, no, you can't use this because we saved this for this moment. And that has been going on for as long as I've been watching rock and roll concerts. You're not going to use Pink Floyd's Mirror Ball in your opening act. That's for damn sure. So, and it's sometimes they even restrict the brightness of the show. I've heard about that from some lighting directors that the master has to be at 70. And, that happens. I guess that's just the nature of the business.
Well, we've certainly restricted the color washes and how equipment can be used. So, sure, you can use that backwash of solar wash units, but the color you're going to use is going to be blue and amber, and that's it. And no, you can't use, the laser gobo in your set. Right. I've had it where we've restricted people to a couple things on the front truss and a couple things on the back truss. Certainly some of the smaller tours, we even put a traveler up that dissects the stage in half, so you don't even have access to the upstage stuff, and the stage is reduced in size so that there's a huge reveal. It's also helpful because you don't want to have to set up the main act's drum kit in 15 minutes. You can have all that stuff set up behind the curtain, and then just one-way traveler comes off and drops.
Right, and it's important to realize that this is not people being jerks. They're not like saying, well, we're the headliners and therefore you can't use this rig. There are certain, like when Steve was talking about color, there are certain signature iconic colors that are associated with different artists. For instance, Prince. Prince had that iconic purple that he used to use all the time. And it was that just became part of his image. So the opening act for Prince, when Prince was touring, would not be using that purple color, because that purple color was very specifically Prince's color. I think that's really important, to respect the artist, and their look. And you just have to do the best you can, because eventually, hopefully, your act will be the headliner, and you'll want to restrict things as well, strictly for artistic purposes.
Well, there's something that's actually missing from the question. And there is I'm kind of suspecting this question is coming around from a small club and not touring, but who knows? You're presuming that the lighting designer has control over this. Really, it's the band's management team. And so it's the management team that tells you what is going to fly every night. It's like a producer on Broadway. The producer walks up and says, I don't want a blue cyc, I want a red one. Either hit the door or give the man or woman a red cyc. So it's the same thing. It's the management team is trying to sell their artist and that show as best they can, and they're going to protect their artist. That is their job, is to protect their property, not someone else's property. So, it's not always the LD or the sound person or the backstage crew that are the villains. And I don't even think there's a villain here. The opening act is there to support the main act, and they may not even be doing the entire tour. The main act is typically paying for the entire evening. So they're paying the bills, they get what they want.
And I must talk from being on stage as an opening act for many big touring acts. The band I was in LA, we supported like REO Speedwagon, Steve Miller. These are, pretty big acts, right? And we were restricted on the amount of equipment to use. And it was cool. Everything was cool. We did a 45-minute set or a 50-minute set, one encore. That's it, one encore. I've seen like really horrible things happen way back in the 70s when Rod Stewart and the Faces were touring the United States. They chose Deep Purple to be their opening act. And I believe Deep Purple lasted 3 or 4 shows. And that's because Deep Purple blew Rod Stewart off the stage. There was no way that band could follow Deep Purple. So the management chooses this, and Steve's absolutely right. And before we end the show today, I'm just going to give a plug to Mike Myers' great documentary called SuperMensch. And SuperMensch is about Shep Gordon, who was one of the greatest rock and roll managers of all time. And these type of decisions are actually discussed in this and revealed in this documentary. So do yourself a favor, go and rent SuperMensch and enjoy.
I was going to say something I hadn't thought about in a long time was I was on tour, and the opening act became the primary act. After about 5 weeks on tour, the primary act was definitely, they had been to the top of the mountain and were looking down at the valley on the other side.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, the opening act was just so much better and fresher. The same management team managed both acts. And we just got the call one day, the opening act is now the primary act. Give them what they want.
Oh, wow!
I mean, and that was some serious payback there.
Deep Purple. That was different. They fired Deep Purple, but other managers were wise enough to pick them up because they were at that moment in time. They changed 2 members of the band, and their music changed, and their whole energy changed. I mean, the same thing happened a couple years ago. We went to see Stevie Nicks. And the Pretenders opened for Stevie Nicks. And Chrissie Hynde was so amazing. Absolutely an amazing performer. And her band had such high power that when Stevie came on, who's a great artist, who has a great show, there was a letdown. There was a definite letdown. So, all this happens. It's really interesting in the rock and roll industry. So, and I think that's every young rock and roll player's dream, that one day they will be the headliner. All right, guys, that Hammond organ solo in the background tells us that once again, you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. Check out our website on lighttalk.org for future guests, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, just about every other podcast site out there. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk fun.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast.
Just remember, if you choose to litigate us, our law firm of Fleck, Flock, Flair, and Glare, with their paralegal snoot, will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Central City, Gainesville, and the Republic of Texas.
And be sure to tune in next week when we discuss ACLs, or aircraft landing lights, I-beams, focus woes, and hey, we're all going back to high school.
All right. All that and the new sponsor, Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Adios, everyone.
Light Talk.